It's January 31st here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with South Korea's response to North Korean threats. Seoul's top envoy in Washington says South Korea will not be shaken by the North's growing provocations on the Korean peninsula, while the regime claimed the cruise missiles it fired on Tuesday were its strategic cruise missile, the Hwasal-2. Global growth will be stronger than expected in 2024 at 3.1%, according to the International Monetary Fund. The agency also raised South Korea's growth outlook to 2.3%. The South Korean men's national football team beat Saudi Arabia 4-2 on penalties, and in doing so advanced to the quarterfinals at the Asian Football Confederation Asian Cup in Qatar. Team Korea will now face Australia on Friday. South Korea will not falter in the face of North Korea's increasing provocations on the Korean peninsula, Seoul's top envoy in Washington says. Instead, he stressed his country will tighten cooperation with the U.S. and Japan. Lee Seung-jae leads us this morning.
Speaking to reporters on Tuesday in Washington, South Korea's ambassador to the United States, Choi Hyun-dong, said Seoul will not be swayed by Pyongyang's continuous provocations and threats. According to Cho, in a situation where the North's aggressive rhetoric and provocations are increasing, South Korea will strengthen its cooperation with the U.S. and Japan. He also reiterated President Yoon Suk-yeol's remarks that Seoul will never be perturbed or will never bow to those provocations. Seoul's envoy to Washington said that despite the heightened tensions, South Korea and its allies will continue to push for dialogue with North Korea. But earlier reports say South Korea and the U.S. agree that although North Korea has recently continued to make high-intensity threats against South Korea, the North does not appear to be preparing for an all-out war. Meanwhile, North Korea continues to deny accusations that it transferred ballistic missiles to Russia. Speaking at the UN Conference on Disarmament in Geneva on Tuesday, acting ambassador to North Korea's permanent mission to Geneva, Bang Kwang-hyuk, stressed that there was no such transfer of weapons to Russia and that there's no reason to respond to groundless allegations created by the U.S. He also said the development of nuclear weapons and missile tests is exercising North Korea's right to self-defense. Bang also slammed the EU for only taking issue with North Korea's missile tests, while remaining silent about what he referred to as U.S. military provocations that pose a serious threat to peace and security on the Korean peninsula. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
North Korea says what it launched off its west coast on Tuesday was an existing strategic cruise missile. According to the North Street media on Wednesday, the regime's military conducted a missile launch drill involving Hwasal-2 cruise missiles. It added that the launch was aimed at checking the rapid counterattack posture and improving its strategic striking capability, and that it did not pose a threat to the safety of neighboring countries. The claims are seen as a way of highlight that the weapon is fully developed and has been developed to frontline units. North Korea also released photos of the launch to show that the missile is capable of flying at low altitudes. The South Korean government has again strongly protested over Japan's repeated territorial claims to Dokdo Island. Japanese Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa said in a speech during a session of the Diet on Tuesday that the island was the territory of Japan historically, geographically, and under international law. Now, this is the 11th year in a row that a Japanese foreign minister has made such claims during an annual speech on the country's foreign policy objectives. In response, the South Korean Foreign Ministry spokesperson said in a statement that Tokyo should immediately withdraw such claims. A memorial built 20 years ago in Japan's Gunma prefecture to remember Korean victims of wartime forced labor is now being removed, despite protests from civic groups and others there. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji tells us more.
Remembrance, reflection, and friendship. This is what's written on the front of a monument at a park in Gunma Prefecture, Japan, in 3 languages: English, Korean, and Japanese. On the back, it says Japan reflects deeply on the historical facts that caused significant damage to the Korean people, and that it will never repeat the same mistakes. The memorial was built 20 years ago by a civic group in Japan to remember the Korean victims who were forced to work as laborers during Japan's colonial rule of Korea from 1910 to 1945. It was mainly created to promote friendship between the two neighboring countries and the public's understanding of the history. But in 2014, Gunma Prefecture refused to renew the state permit, claiming there was a violation of rules after a civic activist made inappropriate political remarks in front of the monument. Then in 2022, Japan's top court ruled in favor of the Gunma officials. And starting this week, the local authorities have now closed the park and have begun to remove the memorial.
Gunma Prefecture gave permission for a monument to be built based on the condition that religious and political events and administrative matters would not be held there. However, I have heard permission has been revoked because the installer repeatedly violated these conditions.
The removal procedure was carried out despite strong protests from civic groups and others. Even the Japanese local news, Asahi Shimbun, said in an editorial on Tuesday that the local government should call off its decision to remove the memorial, calling on them to immediately stop the outrageous action. In response, the South Korean government simply said it hopes the issue can be taken care of without causing friction.
Our government hopes this issue can be resolved in a way that does not undermine the friendly relations between the two countries. To do this, necessary communication is taking place between South Korea and Japan.
The historical issue surrounding wartime forced labor has been a major factor that strained bilateral relations, as hundreds of thousands of Koreans were forced to work in Japanese companies under harsh conditions during colonial rule. 배은지, Arirang News.
The International Monetary Fund says clouds over global economy are beginning to part in 2024. The financial agency also signaled a brighter future for South Korea's economy amid a global landscape of recovery and resilience. Shin Se-byuk reports.
The International Monetary Fund on Tuesday upgraded its growth forecast for South Korea's economy to 2.3% this year. It is a slight increase of 0.1 percentage points from the previous forecast made in October last year. The fresh outlook is an expansion from a 1.4% increase last year. This projection aligns with the OECD's expectations and is higher than the anticipated growth set by the South Korean government of 2.2% and the Bank of Korea, which forecast 2.1%. The boost in South Korea's growth outlook came on the back of the robustness of its two major trading partners, the U.S. and China. The U.S. saw a growth rate of 2.5%, while China saw 5.2% growth in 2023. Globally, the IMF anticipates a 3.1% growth this year, up 0.2 points from its October forecast, largely bolstered by the strong performances of the U.S. and China. IMF chief economist Pierre-Olivier Grinches expressed a positive view of the global economy, highlighting its resilience and the potential for a smooth and stable growth path.
The global economy continues to display remarkable resilience, with inflation declining steadily and growth holding up. The chance of a soft landing has increased.
However, he warned that the foundation for growth was weak and that significant risks such as geopolitical unrest in the Middle East persisted, which could affect commodity prices and supply chains. By region, the U.S. is expected to post 2.1% growth this year. China is forecast to grow 4.6% in 2024, an upward adjustment of 0.4 percentage points. Japan's growth is anticipated to be limited to 0.9% as the boost from last year's weak yen and surge in consumer spending begins to fade. The Eurozone, which has been grappling with an economic downturn, is forecast to grow by 0.9%. In terms of the global outlook for next year, the IMF kept it steady at 3.2%, unchanged from its previous projection. Amid ongoing challenges, the IMF emphasized the need for timely adjustments in monetary policy, enhancing fiscal resilience, as well as pursuing structural reforms for long-term productivity. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
So the global economy is expected to grow 3.1%, while South Korea is forecast to see 2.3% growth in 2024. Now, how realizable are these predictions? Let's turn to Professor Shim Myung-gyu this morning. Welcome.
Hi, good morning.
Thanks for joining us. The IMF predicts the global economy will grow by 3.1% this year. Professor Shim, is this a surprising report to you or a pretty expected one?
Yeah, and less for me, this is not as surprising, and I think that is also the case for most of the economists. Given that there are a lot of positive and negative news all around, and some known risks such as inflation risk seems to be somewhat resolved, it is not as surprising that the IMF has adjusted upward its prediction on the global growth, although the change is somewhat small by 0.2 percentage point. And the expectation on 2025 growth has not adjusted, implying that the surprising component in the forecast are short-lived. I would like to note that while the inflation rate has become lower than before, the interest rate is still high in most of the countries because of the remaining concern for high inflation rate. And while the chief economist of the IMF also mentioned that the fiscal expansion due to election in many countries might increase the growth rate, fiscal multipliers are mostly believed to be not that high, and it does not have a long-run effect. Also, geographical tension is still there, which potentially affect the price level again.
Right, so the global economy to do better than expected in the new year. Now, we also have to talk about IMF's forecast of South Korean economy, which is expected to expand 2.3% from 1.4% from last year's projection. Now, that's also 1% up from its October prediction. Will experts play a big role here? What else?
Yes, your point is exactly correct. As we know, the Korean economy heavily depends on the export. In particular, export to the US and China takes about 40% of total export, according to the government data. Given that the growth rate of the US has been adjusted upward by 0.6 percentage point and that of China has also been increased by 0.4 percentage point, it is natural to expect that export to those countries will rise, boosting the growth rate of Korea. I also think that in line with the comments made by the IMF, the fact that we also have an important election this year might contribute to such a positive adjustment. It is usually the case, as I pointed out earlier, that the ruling party may boost the aggregate economy through several fiscal expansion measures, and they also positively affect the growth rate of Korea.
Definitely. Professor Shim, I also have to point out, it looks like two prominent sources of geopolitical tensions, one over in Ukraine and the one over in the Middle East, will continue at least for now. If they do last for the entire year, how likely is it that the conflict will be a blow to the global economy?
Yeah, while I agree with the usual idea that the geographical risk around the world, including the Israel-Hamas war and Russian invasion of Ukraine, is a still threat on the global economy, I am somewhat skeptical on its severity. Let me first point out the channel that the Israel-Hamas war can be a threat on the inflation rate, which is the factor that has been most important during the last 2 years. If the war is escalated to the entire Middle East, it can be an important threat on the inflation because it can create oil supply disruption. However, the oil market has changed significantly when there were wars in the Middle East because the US has also become a major supplier of the oil thanks to the shale boom. And if I look at the index that captures the geographical risk around the world, which is developed by several leading macroeconomists, the index has not changed much during 2022 and 2023 since the emergence of the Russian invasion on Ukraine, implying that the negative effect of the geographical risk can be limited.
Definitely. You mentioned South Korea's general elections in April. So it's so-called the year of elections with not just South Korea, but over 70 countries around the world holding elections, small and big. Which ones are you paying attention in particular that will make a significant impact to the global economy in 2024 or even in 2025?
Yeah, in terms of the impacts on the global economy, I am particularly interested in the US president election, as others would be. First, it will impact the international trade. If the former president, Donald Trump, would be re-elected, the trade war would occur again, as he is believed to increase the tariff rate on the products imported from China to 60%, which is even much higher than the level he imposed during his first term, 25%. Second, it may affect how the economies would respond to climate change. The former president is also expected to repeal the IRA Act and relevant laws to protect the environment, which would affect not only the speed of climate change, but also many firms preparing for pro-environmental regulations. Third, it can also affect the stance of the Fed, because Donald Trump is expected to elect a new Fed chair who would do more accommodative monetary policy, which can affect the inflation rate, which still stays at the high level.
All right, Professor Shim, thank you so much for that thorough explanation and your insight this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The South Korean men's national football team advanced to the AFC Asian Cup quarterfinals after defeating Saudi Arabia on penalties. In the round of 16 match taking place at Education City Stadium on Tuesday local time, Saudi Arabia went ahead right after the start of the second half. But late into 10 minutes of added-on injury time, South Korean striker Cho Kyu-sung came to the rescue with a headed goal, sending the match to extra time. And after both sides failed to score in the extra time, the match went to penalties. South Korean goalkeeper Cho Hyun-woo received the third and fourth spot kicks, giving the Taeguk Warriors a 4-2 win and a ticket to the quarterfinals. South Korea will now face Australia on Friday. At another livelihood policy debate session, President Yoon Suk-yeol vowed to streamline the workload for people when they're getting administrative services by making hundreds of services fully digital over the next 3 years. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
1,500 government services will be fully digitalized over the next 3 years for easier and simpler access for citizens and residents. That's around a quarter of all services offered by the government. The announcement came from President Yoon Suk-yeol on Tuesday during the 7th livelihood policy discussion with citizens.
국민들이 이리저리 뛰고 각종 증빙 서류들을 준비할 필요 없이 간편하게 필요한 업무를 신청할 수 있게 하겠습니다. 매년 7억 건에 달하는 구비 서류를 30%만 디지털화해도 조 단위의 예산이 절감됩니다.
President Yoon also said the basic information that's used for different services will be soon shared among agencies so applicants do not have to get multiple copies for each, while the more than a century-old personal seal system will be digitalized as well. This is South Korea trying to take a step further despite already having a global lead in digital government. The Interior Ministry said on Tuesday that South Korea ranked number 1 on the 2023 OECD Digital Government Index, topping 4 of the 6 categories: data-driven public sector, government as a platform, open by default, and proactiveness. It came second for the remaining 2, digital by design and user-driven. This is the second consecutive time South Korea topped the list, last time published back in 2019. But as participants in the discussion laid out, there's room to grow, and President Yoon agreed.
이렇게 훌륭한 디지털 정부를 우리가 구축해 놨지만 국민들께서 그 편의성을 체감하기에는 부족한 점이 매우 많이 남아 있습니다. 특히 자영업자나 소규모 기업인들께서 현실에 대하는 행정 업무가 많은 부담이 되고 있습니다.
Other topics covered during this discussion were the gaming industry and telemedicine. For the gaming industry, deceptive item selling practices by gaming companies were raised as a key issue. While gaming companies say there are percentages for a player to win something in a random draw, it's not fully transparent to gamers. The relevant officials vowed to stop this through regulation. As for the telemedicine industry, the government says it's looking to expand the scope of who's eligible to receive care remotely. In addition, they're looking to create a platform so medical records are accessible by healthcare providers to avoid patients having to visit prior hospitals to get their records. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Kim Si-young, and now we turn over to stories from around the world. We begin today in Pakistan, where the country's former Prime Minister Imran Khan was sentenced to 10 years in prison on Tuesday under the charge of leaking state secrets. The former international cricketer already began serving a 3-year prison sentence in August last year after being convicted of corruption. According to Khan's PTI party, the 71-year-old popular former PM and cricket superstar was found guilty of publicizing the contents of a secret message sent by the Pakistan's ambassador in Washington to the government in Islamabad. Tuesday's legal proceedings, however, raised questions as they did not take place in a public courtroom. Instead, a closed courtroom was set up under the Official Secrets Act in Rawalpindi's Adiala jail, where Khan is detained alongside his former foreign minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi. Khan's lawyers protested, saying the trial was highly unconstitutional. The conviction comes only about a week before Pakistan's February 8th general election, where Khan is barred from standing. Imran Khan was ousted as a prime minister by his opponents within the PTI party in 2022. Tech billionaire Elon Musk's Neuralink company on Sunday implanted a wireless computer chip in a human brain for the first time. Posting on social media site X, Musk said that the patient is recovering well and as initial results show promising neuron spike detection. Musk said in another post that Neuralink's first product would be called telepathy, which would enable people to control their phones or computers just by thinking. But the first users will be the people who have lost their use of their limbs. Elon Musk's Neuralink has been under scrutiny for safety protocols. It was recently fined for violating federal restrictions on the transport of hazardous materials. In May last year, Neuralink received US FDA clearance for the company's first human clinical trial. Moving over to Mexico, a highway collision on Tuesday between a cargo truck and a passenger bus has left at least 19 people dead and 18 injured. The passenger bus reportedly had a total of 37 people on board. According to the local news outlet N+, Mexican authorities have temporarily closed circulation on the highway, while the official death toll is yet to be announced. The accident took place in the Pacific coast state of Sinaloa, in the country's northwest, on the coastal highway that links the cities of Mazatlan and Los Mochis. The world's largest parcel delivery company, United Parcel Service, announced on Tuesday that will lay off 12,000 employees as part of an effort to save the firm $1 billion in costs. UPS said the managers and contractor positions will make up the majority of the cuts. The delivery service giant said that volume, revenue, operating profits declined in the last quarter across all its business segments, including the new contract with the Teamsters union, which increased the company's labor costs. At the end of 2023, the UPS had about 495,000 employees globally.
Good morning. The last day of January is starting under cloudy skies in most places, and those in southern provinces will need an umbrella, while people in central parts of the country will need a quality face mask. Sejong and Chungcheong-Namdo province are under emergency fine dust reduction measures this morning. And right now, southern provinces are seeing scattered showers, and it will rain through the morning with about 5 millimeters of drizzle in store. Meanwhile, Jeju will see rain through tonight with up to 10 millimeters in the forecast, but rain-free regions will see sunnier skies as the day goes on. It's a mild start to the day, and highs will be 1 to 5 degrees higher than yesterday. Seoul and Chuncheon getting up to 9, Busan at 14 degrees Celsius. Now, athletes in Gangwon-do province should notice much warmer temperatures under brighter skies with decent air quality. So pleasant weather is in the forecast for you today. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Thursday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.